Hello there, and thanks for joining me. I'm digital artist Aaron Rutten, and in this video, I'm going to comment on Kehinde Wiley's portrait of former President Barack Obama. Now, if you haven't heard anything about this, Barack Obama's portrait was recently unveiled at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, and some people love it and some people hate it. So here's the portrait. Before I get into what I think about it, let's just talk about why people might not like this portrait. For example, it's not serious enough. Presidential portraits need to be really serious, They're serious people and they can't be playful or fun at all. They have to be serious. At least that's what some people think. There's other people who just have been conditioned to hate on Barack Obama. And, even though Donald Trump improperly used $20,000 from his own charity to have a portrait of himself painted, which looks like absolute crap in comparison to this, boo, Barack Obama did something creative, ooh. So obviously I'm not one of those people who hates the portrait, so let's talk about what I like about it. First, it's refreshing to see something different than what's been done to death. It's great that a very talented African-American artist is getting the spotlight. Obama adds some diversity to the series of portraits, and I appreciate the surreal, whimsical style coupled with the seriousness of the subject. And I respect that Obama has his own taste and did not choose to compromise on what he wanted. But that's really kind of an overview of the portrait as a whole and how I feel about it. But let's break this down into a more detailed analysis of the painting and what I like specifically about the painting. First, it has a very strong contrast overall, which implies a boldness and strength. Obviously, the colors are very colorful and vibrant and saturated, rather than being too muted as portraits can often be. And what's really interesting here, unlike a lot of the other portraits, the subject is removed from the background context and placed into a fantasy world of beautiful flowers and leaves, rather than being in the White House or at their own personal house or standing in front of the Capitol. The background kind of overlaps and envelops the subject, which is really interesting. I'll come back to that a little bit later and what I think that means. There's kind of also ambiguous planes. The foreground is the background and the background is the foreground. For example, if we look up here, these leaves are overlapping the chair, but they appear to be a continuous background. And then they kind of come up here and they start to overlap here. And so it's really interesting that the chair can be sitting here on this plane, and these leaves are obviously existing all in a background plane, but that plane is consistent all the way through. It's very surreal. Obviously, he's got to be sitting on something, but the chair to me is kind of a transitional element to connect the subject to something like the White House or the presidency. It's kind of that middle road between that surreal background and the subject. Interwoven among the leaves are these really interesting muted patches of leaves, which helps to boost the vibrancy and colors, but it also balances the overall color intensity so this thing doesn't burn your retinas. I feel like that was very intentional because even though there's going to be some leaves that are kind of covered by other leaves, these background leaves just kind of appear like they're maybe not necessarily supposed to be darker, but just less vibrant. Another interesting observation is there is an ordinary amount of background space reserved, but it's filled with a pattern rather than being like a background of the Oval Office or something like that, which creates an unusual amount of negative space. So what I mean by that is there's all this area here where you could imagine that there would be, a picture on the wall or a door over here, like you'd see in a traditional portrait. But since that stuff's not there, you'd think that this painting would end up getting cropped to something more like this because there's not a background. But instead, that background space or that negative space was intentionally left there. If we go ahead and dim this a little bit and we pull up the rule of thirds grid, you can see that that negative space was strategically used. We can also see how it was composed. We have Obama's head right here in this area. The body takes up this area, the chair here and here and here with the legs. There's a space for the entire leg here and then a little bit of knee there. And then if we look at the lines, this flower intersects the line, this one touches it. These two are kind of grouped here. And so Kehinde Wiley obviously knows what he's doing as far as composing a portrait. While the style is a little bit different than what we'd expect, it still retains a lot of the traditional elements of portrait painting. Now, in addition to the rule of thirds, let's also take a look at the golden ratio divine proportion, and we can see how this was used. Now, I'm going to assume that this was probably the composition that they used, but if you look at this spiral here, this is a guide that master painters use to compose their painting, and this kind of represents the flow of the eye throughout the painting. So if we watch this green line, we can see it kind of starts here. It hits that bright spot on Obama's foot. It starts to move past this flower here, You start to see his leg. It runs right into this flower here, right into that flower there, right into that flower there, goes right past this one, curls up and ends right on a flower there, which bumps right up against Barack Obama's head. And so the flow of the painting takes you across the whole body and you end on the head, which is the focal point. That is absolutely perfect golden ratio composition. And you can tell that that was intentional by the placement of the flowers. The placement of the flowers guide you through the painting. And that's one of the key factors of good art, is keeping the eye moving throughout the painting. The worst thing you can have is a portrait that somebody looks at and goes, oh great, that looks like them, and then there's nothing there that keeps them engaged. Going back to the flowers a little bit, they do seem a little out of place. They don't seem to be part of the plants that are surrounding them. They just kind of seem to be just there, floating there. Maybe somebody put them there, maybe they're growing there. But they're not part of that leafy background that dominates the scene. Now, I haven't really said too much about how Barack Obama looks in this painting, so I'll discuss that a little bit. He's somewhat casually dressed. He's not wearing a tie, which I think is kind of cool. There's an interesting kind of yellowish early morning light reflected on the side of his face and hands, whereas most everything else has only the green of the leaves reflected. So you can see there's kind of this light coming over here, but you don't really see the light in the rest of the composition. And then here on the knee and on the shoes and on the arm, there's this green from the background leaves. Now, what you'll notice is that green isn't present on the face like you might expect, or the hands, which was probably because the green wouldn't be very flattering to the skin, but maybe the skin was left that way intentionally just to make it stand out a little more. So overall, this portrait really makes me think. It makes me think about the portrait. It's not like a lot of the other portraits in that gallery where it's just a face of a dude and you don't really think too much about what's going on there. The meaning, to me at least, is not obvious and it's open to interpretation. So how do I interpret this piece? It makes me think about how we're surrounded by the same old patterns that envelop us and bog us down. These patterns become overgrown and they block anything that is different from having a chance to be part of the picture. When a beautiful flower begins to grow, it looks even more stunning against the repetitive and stagnant background. Even though the flowers are partially concealed in this painting, they still stand out. And even though the background is creeping in around him, Obama still seems confident. To me, this portrait says that this is a president who is not afraid to stand out rather than blend in. And that is a thing of beauty that is rare at the present time. If you look, you will find beauty among the background noise. The leaves are a distraction, but the distraction isn't working, and anyone with an eye for beauty can see the flowers clear as day. So yes, this portrait is different. Yes, this portrait stands out. It breaks with tradition. It's a little far out, but I like it, and I feel like that's what we need more of in this world, is stuff that kind of breaks the mold. I'm interested to know what you think about Kehinde Wiley's portrait of former President Barack Obama. Comment down below and let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed this video, click the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.